Good day, this is Redhawk. I'm here with Mary Anne, and today we're going to perfection. Perfection. Wait, maybe it's imperfection. You know, we all have this little image in our head of what is perfect and what is not, and it betrays us. It gets in our way. It creates obstacles. You know, one of the things I'm most proud of in my own journey is my ignorance. I've come to love it. I no longer see it as a negative and a poo-poo on me. I see it as my growing edge. Oh, that's stuff I don't know. And thank God for these little phones, man, because you can tune in to the world around you and you can check it out. So one of the things I like in me that I've come to enjoy is my imperfection. It feels more like a gift. And the more honest I am with it, the more I look at it, the more I look at and explore my own image of what I see as perfect. Well, now we're at the crux of what the deep end is all about. Waking up is so hard to do, isn't it? Welcome. Boy, I cut that off fast. How you doing, Mary Anne?
No slow fade out there.
Yeah.
Let's get perfect with it, will we?
Yeah. It's a perfect day, though, isn't it?
It is.
I mean, it just feels the sun is shining, the birds are chirping, the wasps are coming out. Ooh, I don't like those wasps. That makes it imperfect. Wait. What did I just do with my image of perfect? I can't take the perfection of everything and disclude those things that are uncomfortable to me and still find it. And there is the crux of much of the problem, is our own discomfort. We'll do anything to run from our own discomfort. And part of our image of perfection and imperfection, our whole understanding of it is resting on some issues that we're going to go into today. I want us to be real clear, though, whatever image of perfection you have, it's imperfect. And once you get that little paradox of what it is, you can dance and laugh a little more, you can play a little more, and all these things are very helpful. Now, I want to talk a little bit about some understandings of perfection, okay? And I'm going to go back to some of the Jesus teachings, but not so much the Jesus teaching as what has happened to the Jesus teaching. For instance, for Jesus, the whole concept of perfection was basically a growing image. It was a process. So for Jesus, something that was perfect was always growing. At the well, when he meets the woman and she says, "Hey, I hear you've been doing some really good stuff. Would you give me some of that and help me?" And he goes, You're a Syrophoenician. You're a less than. You're nothing more than a bitch," is basically what he says if you read the original text. And she comes back at him and says, "Yes, but even the dogs, the bitches, we get the scraps that come off the table of nourishment. And shouldn't you be helping us with that?" And Jesus at that moment grows and basically says, "You're right." And he realizes that the love he has is not just for him and his people, but is for all human beings, even those that he might have been culturally seen as less than. So you see, for him, a perfect love is a love that's always growing. Now, when you take the Jesus teaching and you push it through to the Greco-Roman thinking of the, and I'm putting in quotes, church fathers, what you see is a very different understanding of perfection. Its perfection is static. And I've used this before, I think, in one of the podcasts, this metaphor. But if you look at a glass or a cup or a chalice, the Greco-Roman thinking already has a perfect chalice in mind, and that's what we're supposed to go to. Within the Jewish thinking, there is no perfect chalice because the chalice is always being redone, and the next artist, the next artisan to put their hand to the creation will create something more beautiful. And so this perfect love within the church is this static that we're supposed to hold in our head and look up to and think we're going to never achieve. And for the Jews, this love is just the growing edge of your own compassion, your own heart. So already we've established an understanding of perfect and how an understanding of imperfection became very imperfect when the church tried to institute it. And you can go back to our podcast on institutions to see what happens in instituting something. So today we're going to talk about what it is that this imperfection is and how it plays out in our heart. Because really what we all want, come on, let's admit it, is to be whole people, to live with a wholeheartedness of life. And I have to say, a large part of what we're going to do today comes from a book that you, Mary Anne, turned me on to by Brene Brown called The Gifts of Imperfection. And I would recommend everybody read this book. It'll do your heart good. So thanks for that, Mary Anne.
Sure, and check out her TED Talk as well.
Yeah, her TED Talk is awesome. Mm-hmm. Her TED Talk is awesome. So what do we know when we look at Brene Brown and her view? And I'll be honest, there's some other people who've written on this, and we'll get into them. John Bradshaw's one on the roots of shame, or healing the shame that binds you, which is beautiful. But the whole concept of wholehearted living and the root of waking in one's own heart is a sense of, I am enough. And we don't have that. Most of us don't have that. We think that there's something we have to attain, we have to shoot towards, when really wholehearted living is a process. And I might even suggest that wholehearted living is the journey that we've been talking about for almost 40 podcasts now. How do you live wholeheartedly? I mean, none of us are going to live up to any image of perfection we have. And what I want to do today is show you how bogus that image is and what it is we can do to create a world within our hearts that are growing and real.
Well, and stop striving for perfection and start living.
And start living. And living wholeheartedly. Wholeheartedly. So how do we really talk about this stuff? What do we really need to do? Well, let's look at the roots of imperfection. And that's why I brought up John Bradshaw's Healing the Shame That Binds You. Because shame, man, it is everything. Now, what I'm talking about is not guilt, although we can do a guilt trip on us. But really what we're doing when we're doing a guilt trip on us is we're stuck in a shame loop.
Well, sometimes, though, guilt can tell us where we need to change the way we're doing things.
Well, and guilt is and shame are both, I'm not poo-pooing them because there's a place. I think America should be shaming our white supremacists, not saying I'm sure they're good guys.
Right.
I think there's some things that we do need to shame. But here's the main difference. Guilt is, I did something bad. I'm guilty of that. I really screwed up. Shame is, I am bad. You see the difference? We lose perspective. We lose perspective because what we do is we assume that it's not just an act we did, but it's us. And when we're brought up, our family of origin stuff, man, there is so much shaming that goes on. And we could do a whole show on shame, and I'm not going there because it's a negative place. And I want to go to how we get out from under the shame. So how do we get out from under the shame? This is huge. This is huge. What we're talking about is creating shame resilience. Now, what that is, according to Brene Brown, is the ability to recognize shame, to move through it constructively while maintaining worthiness and authenticity. Those are huge words, worthiness. We all want to feel self-worth. And to ultimately develop, because this is what self-worth does develop, courage, compassion, and connection. And those are huge because what they do is they create a new loop that creates authenticity, and authenticity creates more of the courage, compassion, and connection. All three are very, very necessary to grow. Now, what does shame need to grow? If you want to grow out of your shame, you create an authentic person and you become more courageous. That's more large-heartedness. You become more compassion. Compassion is seeing the other person as an equal. If you see the other person as less than, oh, that poor homeless person. No, that's sympathy. Empathy is where you go, gosh, I can't believe what she must be feeling is just amazing. We got to do something. That's compassion. That's compassion. So what is it that shame needs? It needs three things to grow. And we can see these in our lives. It needs secrecy, it needs silence, and it needs judgment. And think about our families of origin. For me, it's the school system. The school system was shameful when I grew up. The way I say it is the big problem with the school system is that the teachers don't like the kids. I don't think that's as true today because teachers have other options. But when I was a kid, if you were a woman, teaching was only one of 3 or 4 options that you could do. Nursing, secretary, mom, women doctors where you didn't see them. I never saw a woman doctor until I was an adult. Thank God for my generation. But shame keeps us down. It keeps us down. And what it does is we end up running our lives because we're afraid of shame. We're afraid of being shamed. And so what this causes us is to become inauthentic, not real.
Well, and we internalize that shame as well. I mean, it's not, society can shame us, our families can shame us, but it's when we become that internal shamer, then we get really stuck.
And that happens very early. Yeah. These are loops that we create in ourselves of I'm not worthy, I'm not enough. And most of us have these, and it's part of the front lines of we have to work on them. I'm pushing 70, and I'm still working on that stuff. A lot of stuff I thought was my family of origin was the education system just shaming the hell out of me. And screw that.
Well, and I think one of the pieces there, too, is we make mistakes, but we are not our mistakes, and having that distinction. And so when we start to think that, okay, I did this terrible bad thing, so now I'm a terrible bad person, once we can separate that, I did this terrible bad thing, but I'm not going to do it anymore because I can see that it was a terrible bad thing and move on from there. But our shame keeps us going, okay, I'm a terrible bad person, and so then you keep repeating it over and over.
And as everybody from Carl Jung to up today has said, neurosis is a form of inauthentic suffering. It's not real. So what you do is you end up chasing your own butt in smaller and smaller circles of shame, and you think you're suffering when really you're not suffering, you're just being neurotic. And that's not real. But I want to say that culture does this too. Our culture is huge on this. And Brene Brown lays this out, if you're a woman, being feminine, it tells some of the most important qualities for women are being thin, being nice, being modest. And if women want to play it totally safe, they have to be willing to stay as small, quiet, and attractive as possible. Those are forces. I mean, just get a Vogue magazine. Just look at what fashion is and how we define it today. Now, men, we don't get out so easy either. When it comes to masculinity, men are supposed to be in emotional control, primacy of work, control over woman, pursuit of status. We're supposed to stop feeling, start earning, and give up on all meaningful connection. The whole concept at the basis of shame is, I don't need anybody. I can do it all alone. As a matter of fact, it's only mine if I do it alone. Wow. Now you think of our leader right now, who's Donald Trump, the con man, Don the Con. He's literally conned himself, thinking he can do it all by himself. And everybody around him sees what's really happening. It's the emperor with no clothes, but he's caught in his own shame loop. And this is my compassion and empathy for Don the Con. He's stuck. He is stuck in a place, and he's stuck in a place that we have created, that America has created with its amoral capitalism. And it has to do with shaming, and it keeps us from connecting with each other. I mean, it really does. During Barbara Bush's funeral, Don the Con was playing golf. It's really amazing. Now, within this, if you want to be authentic, you might actually become a tragic character in a Greek play. Now, I'm talking James Comey. That guy is about as real as they come. He's authentic. And one of the rules of authenticity is you're not playing it safe. It's an unsafe thing.
Well, and there are no guarantees.
There are no guarantees, and nor should there be.
Right.
But one of the things that authenticity does say is it's going to bring vulnerability.
That was what I was just thinking.
Yeah, it's on the tip
like,
of all our brains. Golly, I got to make myself vulnerable. What did E.E. Cummings write? To be nobody but yourself in a world which is doing its best night and day to make you everybody but yourself means to fight the hardest battle which any human being can fight and never stop fighting. Staying real is one of the most courageous battles that any of us will ever fight. The challenge of the status quo is not really authenticity as much as it is the audacity of authenticity. And I mean, if you want to see who James Comey is playing out in real time, the audacity of authenticity. Is he getting everything right and perfect? Hell no. And he's even said in all his interviews, I'm a flawed human being. But is he letting that stop him? Is he letting the status quo stop him? He is right now the illustration of what imperfection can be, which is not perfect. But what a gift he is to all of us by merely stating these things. What a gift. And
well, and that's a challenge for all of us to be able to state who we are, you know. We can slip into that so easily that, you know, people that bring themselves up and rise up into a different socioeconomic status or in a different crowd, and then they're ashamed of their past, and that catches up with them because it's almost like there's something wrong with that. Whereas if you can embrace that, and that's part of who you are, and that's nothing to be ashamed of.
And you can't tell people not to be ashamed.
No, you can't.
It's an amazing process. And again, I like the word of wholeheartedness to being a journey, that this wholeheartedness to connectivity, to compassion and courage. It takes courage. Believe me, you know, we are called to fit in. High school and the education system, regrettably, the education is only secondary to the concept of being quiet, fitting in, knowing your place. And these are all, when we did the show on America, we talked about Tocqueville, talking about the big problem of self-rule is that people won't have a place. So we have to each find our place, but none of us really fit in, you know. Well, actually, that's not true. A lot of people in high school fit in, and they did really well. They fit in. They became doctors and lawyers and very successful. They all fit in beautifully, and now they're in the middle of their midlife crisis. Actually, it's their middle passage, and they can't figure out what's going on. They can't figure out why who they are is so inconsistent with where they are in the world. And again, I've known doctors who should have had a saw and a hammer in their hand and they would have been happy. But that's life.
Well, that gets to our show on happiness, doesn't it?
Yeah. So how do we become authentic? Choosing authenticity, and again, I'm going to Brene Brown there. She says, is, again, three things, and we'll get back to the three words I'm going to use over and over: courage, compassion, and connection. Cultivating courage to be imperfect. This is about how we create authenticity. The courage to be imperfect, to set boundaries, and to allow ourselves to be vulnerable. It takes a lot of courage to do that. And again, I go back to the word courage, courage, which is French, which means large heart. To be wholeheartedness and to have courage is to have a growing heart that is getting bigger and bigger. I always hate people who said, I've got Jesus in my heart. And I say, well, is the whole world there and all the people starving with him? They go, what do you mean? I go, well, when Jesus really comes into your heart, he doesn't come alone. He comes with all the suffering in the world. It's all right there with him. And if you're not feeling that, you don't have shit in your heart. Maybe that's all you have in your heart. And I'll use the word crap from now on, although I think that word is getting more popular as we go on.
I heard it this morning at a breakfast from the speaker.
The second thing we need, other than cultivating courage, is exercising our compassion that comes from knowing that we are all made of both strength and struggle. If you think there's someone out there not struggling, even Don the Con, that guy has a struggle. You know, one of the things Comey said in an interview with the New Yorker, he said it feels like he has a huge hole in his heart that he is struggling and always trying to fill. And that's something that many of us have, and I think it's part of the journey is realizing, I'm not going to spend my time doing that anymore. And what you begin to see is other people's struggles, other people's strengths. And that creates empathy, and it creates compassion.
And seeing them step out and do what they need to do, regardless of their own imperfections. I mean, I think that's what really strikes me about all of this, is being brave enough to be out there in the world, even though you know that you're not perfect, and even though that you know that there could be some public shaming, or there could be some external things that come at you, but being strong enough and having the courage within yourself to stand your ground and to just be who you are, and let that be enough.
Yes.
And I think the world is calling us to do that right now, to be who we are, not to be somebody else, not to be what other people think we should be, but to be who we are. And no matter what station or no matter where we're at.
Amen. And you know, people are always trying to factor people into these categories and then demonize them. And I think that that's part of what's going on in our midst right now, that it's easy to feel secure in yourself if the other guy's more imperfect than you are. And that's the loop that this courage and vulnerability and authenticity is all a part of, because when you begin to wake up, it really hurts. To be honest, it just hurts for the simple reason that you have to own yourself and you have to own your own story. Now,
and not compare yourself.
And you compare yourself to yourself.
Right. To others. Yeah.
It's a self defining loop that allows you to process your own story and to be honest enough with it to own the aspects of yourself. And I have to say, I know people who are extremely inauthentic. They always take the position of the people around them. They're what I call daisy throwers. They're just always, everything's always wonderful and good, and they don't share the story of their lives with themselves, much less with others. Now, this is where community and connection comes in, because it's huge that we do need to share our stories. We need to share them in such a way that that allows us to grow and not be judged. When I say we need to share our stories, I want you to know that you don't share them with everybody. It's a privilege to be let in. It is an honor to be invited into someone's story. And if you're around someone where you tell them their story and they start going, well, you should have, or you start telling your story and they saying, oh, you poor person, or you start telling your story and they come back with a response that has any kind of judgment, shame, guilt, any of that in it, versus saying, damn, that is heavy. That is heavy. If you're not telling your story to someone that's not going to walk it with you, don't tell it to that person.
Sometimes it's hard to know who that person is.
And this is what maturing is about. This is what getting ripe is about, is you begin to learn, well, I'm not sure I was right in telling my story to that person. That was not helpful to me or them. I feel really bad right now after having told them my story. I don't feel good about it.
Well, and I think there's a distinction between telling your story and telling the facts of your life. Because telling the facts of your life can be broadcast out there. But when you tell the story of your life, that's different. That's when you get into the emotion and you become vulnerable. And you're right, that is not for everyone.
Yes, and that's a good distinction, because when you tell the story, what you're really talking about something personal. And when we're talking about something personable, that's letting you in, people letting you into your heart. And that's where we really need to find the community around us. A good friend, they're not going to make they're going to be honest, but not make you feel uncomfortable. They're going to allow anyone's feelings to say what's going on, and that's going to be okay. These are issues that, to me, are just huge. To have people like that. And that's why I don't share my story with a lot of people, because the fact is, to hell with them.
I told mine in the newspaper. And, but there was something, I did it for a cause. I did it for a reason. And there was something that a lot of people did not get, what a big decision that was to do that. To publicly go out and tell my story, and that it was huge. And you're right. And some people just kind of dismissed it. It was like, oh, no big deal. It was a huge decision, and I think that to do that it's
courageous.
It took a lot of courage.
Yeah.
And I'm just beginning to realize how much courage that did take.
And amen. And good for you, and keep doing it. But, again, we can find telling our story to some people is a different thing.
Right.
So what are we looking for in people? When I talk about this shame resilience or a resilient spirit, and I believe that resilience is the root of all wisdom. If you want to, it's about being flexible, changing your parameters, recalibrating. It's about all those things. But Brene Brown is a researcher. And so, and she's gotten caught up in her research, and she even talks about that's her imperfection was getting caught up in her research, and it kept her from being authentic. But she started looking at what makes up an authentic person, not self-denial, but self-acceptance. And she came up with the 5 most common factors that she discovered of resilient people. 1, they're resourceful and have good problem-solving skills. And these are people you want to look for to hang out with, not to mention be one of those people to hang out with. People who are resilient are more likely to seek help. They don't try to solve it all themselves. They also hold a belief that they can do something that will help them to manage their feelings and to cope. In other words, they don't feel helpless. Their helplessness, like I said with my ignorance in the beginning, my ignorance helps me know what I'm not knowing, that I can therefore take the next step. Number 4, they have social support available to them. This is important, to have social support. If you're going it alone, man, I don't know how to say that. There's churches, there's dance groups, there's groups of all sorts that you can find some interest in and gather with. Find some friends that you have interest with, and find some support around you. Also, they're connected with others such as family and friends. And I'll be honest, I don't feel like I'm the most resilient spirit. The older I get, the more I don't want to really be around people, and I have to question that.
Well, and that's the question there is that part of the maturation process.
Well, and one therapist said to me, she said, people who are extroverts, most of their adult life as they get older become more introverted. And I was kind of an extreme extrovert. I just wanted to meet everybody. I wanted to know everybody's story. And now I'm just trying to go, I wonder if I was distracting myself from my own story, from paying attention to my own stuff. As a pastor guy, it's very easy to get hung up in other people's neurosis and think it's suffering and you're doing something. And it took me about 10 years in ministry where I quit doing that. And by the way, I became very unpopular when I quit doing that. As they say, I can preach a church down faster than anybody because comfort is not something I give people. And one of
there's a little comfort in there. I mean,
it's true.
Well, there's a belief. I think what we need to do is share with people that there is a belief in who they are as a person and their ability to overcome whatever obstacles are in their own life. And knowing that you're not helpless. And I think that goes back to that resilience piece, helping people to, I guess the question is, can resilience be learned? And so you have to take those steps if you want to learn how to do that.
And yes, it can be learned. And another thing Brene Brown puts forth as she gets into spirituality, which is really about this belief in connection. And not just with another person, but with the world around us, with the birds and the bees and the grass and the air we breathe, the water that we drink. It's about creating this connection to it all. And most of us, environmentally are waking up to that. But she's discovered 3 significant patterns that emerged that are essential to spiritual resilience. Cultivating hope, which you addressed, Mary Anne. Practicing critical awareness, which I hate to say the word preach, but you and I both been preaching that on ourselves for as long as I've known you.
Yeah.
And letting go of numbing and taking the edge off vulnerability, discomfort, and pain.
I'm still working on that one.
It's hard because denial is a wonderful thing. It keeps us from seeing stuff that really hurts. And who wants to hurt, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
So, imperfection.
Well, before we kind of go on there, I just feel like I have to say something about forgiveness and forgiving ourselves, because I think that's such a crucial part when we start to examine our life and examine ourselves. And if we, I can remember saying things like, "Oh, I should have done this differently," and having well-meaning, great, close people say, "You did the best you could. You did great. You did fine." But internally, I knew that I did not do as well as I would have liked to have done. And so being able to be aware of that and being self-forgiving in those. And because if I couldn't forgive myself, then I would just continually beat myself up. And by continually beating yourself up for those mistakes, you're right, you get into that loop. And it's how do you get out of it?
Well, and now you've put, what I call a release valve on shame, because forgiveness is a release valve. It's where you quit seeing yourself as a bad person and begin to see like that was a bad thing. That was or a stupid thing in my case, because most of what I did wasn't really bad. I mean, as a delinquent, I did some bad stuff as a teenager, but most of the stuff was just poor judgment, stupidity, ignorance. But when I look back, I go, that was bad. I wasn't a bad person.
But you may have hurt somebody.
I may have hurt
inadvertently.
Somebody.
Yes.
So what do we do? How do we create this world? And critical awareness, we've talked about it over and over. And there's 3 questions you can ask yourself in a reality check. Is what I'm seeing real? When I run a thing in my head and I catch myself, do the images convey real life, or is this some fantasy I'm running? My wife will say something to me in the morning, and I'll think she said it harshly, and all day I'm creating these scenes in my head, and I'm getting more pissed off because she said something. And then I'll call her and I say, "Hey, this morning you said this. what did you mean? She goes, oh, I was just in a hurry. I didn't have any. And I go, oh. See, I went up the ladder on that one, man. I created one story and then created another story on the story I created. And I was 4 stories deep on an intonation in her voice and never even reality checked it.
And we do that all the time. Even in the grocery store line. I mean,
someone will look at us.
Right.
Boy, they were harsh.
Or they didn't smile.
That's okay. Another thing is, when you're having these thoughts, does the image reflect healthy, wholehearted living, or do they turn my life, my body, my family, and my relationships into objects and commodities? That's huge. We turn each other into commodities, things to move around the playing field of our psychodrama.
So that we can get our needs met.
Yeah. Or wants.
Right.
And the third is, who benefits by my seeing these images and feeling bad about myself? This is usually always about money and or control. You know, someone will say something and we'll do a whole routine because we feel like they've just controlled us. On Facebook, this happens all the time. Somebody said something to me who I went through some trauma with years ago. In a pastoral relationship, and I basically said, he was saying how judgmental we were, and I kind of said, well, you're being judgmental about us being judgmental, aren't you? And he came back about how I destroyed his marriage, that his wife was having 4 affairs before they found out he was having one, and his wife basically took a sleeping pill, and he went and started screwing the woman who was with him.
Oh, my God.
And it's just so messy. Yeah. And he said all this on Facebook, and he told me as his pastor, I just embarrassed him. And I just said, I think you're embarrassing yourself right now. He was caught in a shame loop, and he tried to get me. I felt like I should come back at him. You know what I mean? This is projection. But in my head, I went, wow, this guy, he must be
suffering.
Yeah, chasing his own butt in these really shameful circles. And I know more about his family history, so I just said, I just wish you the best peace, and I hope you find some peace. And he took down his post, and I pray for the guy. I worry about him. I don't want to be around him. And he's part of the reason I don't want to be pastor anymore. But making oneself vulnerable, this grows forgiveness. And I want us to see that, because when we realize that we're a soft tissue being and not this hard-hearted me against the world, something new enters us. And what that newness is really a sense of play and wonder. Wonder about the world, wonder about the other, and mostly wonder about ourselves and the great mystery we are. And I think that that's an important piece for us to invite into our own being.
And I think that also connects us. I was talking with someone this morning about how we don't have a way to talk to each other, that they were lamenting back to the days where there were 3 television channels and Walter Cronkite gave everybody a shared message, and you sat around the water coolers and everybody was doing the same thing and seeing the same things, and you had this shared stories. And we don't have that anymore. And I think what you're just talking about, when we remember that there's something inside of us that is very, very much the same as what is inside every single human being, no matter where they are or what they're doing, then that's what connects us. And we have to connect to that first so that we can see it in others. And then we can start to have a shared story, a shared conversation.
And our minds are engineered to seek out patterns and assign meanings to them. Human beings are meaning-making species. That's what we do. And what Mary Anne and I are talking about here is the meaning we give ourselves in a self-inverting, seriously, this shame loop that we get in that keeps us thinking how imperfect we are. Yeah, we're imperfect, but that's a gift.
The gifts of imperfection.
The gift of imperfection. It's a gift. And to get outside of the shaming loop is to begin to address the mystery of the world and the mystery of ourselves in such a way that we create a universe of wonder and play. And that's called filled with wonder. That's called wonderful.
Yes. Wouldn't that be wonderful to have that?
So, Mary Anne, any final comments for today? Perspectives?
No, not just, I think I've said all I've come to say.
So here we are, my friends. And I want us to see that this imperfection, if we really ride it, if we allow ourselves to connect, to be courage enough to be vulnerable, to find this compassion in us that allows us to ride with other people in their lives, something wonderful happens. And it's the root of everything around you, wherever you are. It's wonder. Wonder is truly where we're going next. Wonder is a component of the human being that is there as a child, and somehow it gets weaned out of us. It gets bred out of us. So by the time we're 20, we're walking around in a world where it seems like everything is explainable. And yet, when we look at each thing, the mystery gets deeper. How do we create a world of wonder? How do we create this world where curiosity and noticing things is the root of our being? Join us next week on the podcast of The Deep End. God's peace, God's blessing, and in all things, may life find you open and true.